Hey everybody, Danielle Egnew here. Welcome to inPsight Radio, where you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. It is wonderful to be with you all this week, and today's show is going to be pure time-jumping fun. Today's show is all about past lives. And why is that cool? Well, one of the many reasons that it's cool is because so many of us talk about past lives. How much do they affect us? How important is it that we remember the past lives that we've endeavored into? How much of that do we take from lifetime to lifetime? I mean, there's so much going on with past lives right now. And as we get into the show, I'm also going to let the cat out of the bag about world leaders and who is an old soul, a younger soul, and a middle-aged soul. And you might be a little surprised to find out that old souls are not always the characters in the play that are the I have everything handled people. Old souls are not always the characters that know what they're doing at all times and are benevolent, and they're not always the Gandalf. Sometimes old souls are poop starters. And it really does take an old soul to hold the program of not learning or changing the very narcissistic way of doing things in order to bring a very specific lesson through. So you may be surprised towards the end of the show to find out who is the old soul, who's the young soul, who's a middle-aged soul, and some of them will be pretty obvious, I think, when it comes right down to it. But let's get started here with the idea of past lives. You know, what are they? And obviously, they are just exactly what they indicate. They are a lifetime that we had as a soul previous to the life that you're experiencing now. And here's a little bit of a news flash, okay, for everyone listening today. There is no such thing on the earth as a person who has never, ever had a life before Earth. And I'll tell you why. Earth is a high-intensity engagement planet. So if you've never had a life anywhere as a sentient, as we like to call them, upright being, then your first lifetime is not going to be on the planet. You're going to have lifetimes other places. You may have lifetimes as other beings, as maybe a squid or a horse or something. Yet you're not going to come in for the very first time ever in the whole wide world, in the history of whoever you are. You're not going to come in as a human your very, very, very first life. That's just not going to be the way it rolls. Our environment here is far too chaotic. It is far too complicated, quite frankly, for someone who's never lived a life. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So when we think about everybody living down here together, what we've got going on is a pretty tremendous swath of diversity in souls who not only have been a human being before and then doubled up in terms of, lessons and whatnot, yet we're also dealing with souls that have come in here from other planets, other planes. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary what we deal with on Earth. So know that when we talk past lives, we're not simply talking about being a human being. We have past lives from many different realms, from elemental realms, from off-world realms. It is mind-boggling when we realize that as spirits, we come into a human body to experience a high degree of chaos and a high degree of lessonry in this particular three-dimensional environment. And we do require a little tread off of our tires in order to do that down here. I mean, you just don't come to planet Earth with no former experience, not as a human being. That just does not happen. Now, we do see a lot of folks who surf into bodies here on Earth who come from other realms who may not have had a lifetime as a human being before. And we see a lot of this with folks that we like to label as, quote, on the spectrum. And I'm over labels. How about you? I mean, I'm sure I could be labeled as all kinds of things, big, bright, colorful, some prohibitive, some neon labels. I bet I could hold a ton of labels. If we really want to break people down into who and what they are, my God, I'd be a poster child for tons of sticky labels. I would look like one of those crazy trunks with all the bumper stickers on it from the 1930s, from the traveling vaudeville performers. That's how many labels I'd have. That being said, When we label someone as on the spectrum, a lot of those people that I see that have been on the spectrum actually are experiencing their first lifetime here on Earth. And they've come from really, literally some very connected cultures prior to coming to Earth. And those cultures are very connected telepathically. They don't deal as much with sensory input because you have to remember, gang, we are evolved monkeys. We are evolved mammals. And as evolved mammals, we, of course, are then going to want to experience sensation. And if you come from a galactic off-world culture, like, say, Otur, or any of those out there, especially the cultures out by the Pleiades that have really gone beyond sensory input in terms of defining your environment. I mean, think about it for a minute. If we look at a being or an animal like a jellyfish, we don't even know how a jellyfish functions. Did you know that? Seriously, science has no flippin' clue how jellyfish work. They have no idea. They don't know where their brain is. They're not exactly sure where their heart is. They can see where their stomach is because you can see through them. Yet they have no idea how they're able to communicate with one another. They can't determine that it's any sort of smell. They can't determine that it's any sort of hormone. And when I feel jellyfish, I can tell you that jellyfish communicate electromagnetically. They communicate telepathically. They honestly share a giant energy field together, especially when you see those really big pods of jellyfish like moon jellies. Those jellyfish are completely sharing a massive environment of energy together. So they're traveling through the oceans and they're able to connect with one another and speak with one another in a way that's really pronounced. Yet we, in our monkey suits down here, who smell and taste and chew and eat and use the restroom and we do all these things, we don't really get that primary form of communication that in our perception is devoid of so much sensory input. Now, just as a sidebar, when I feel into moon jellies, they are receiving massive amounts of information that we as human beings also have an option to receive, yet we're too busy eating pie and looking at something pretty and having somebody, pet our head because we're uptaking information through a sensory capacity that's very physical, that we're not actually keying in on those same electromagnetic and just honestly vibrational and electric signals that jellyfish are picking up. That doesn't mean they have less than a sensory experience than we do. That's just what they dig in terms of their own sensory experience. So when we're talking about human beings who come in on the, quote, spectrum, end quote, many of those beings are people who've spent huge, long-duration lifespans off of the planet in a different environment where the stimulation of the flesh was not even hardly in the bailiwick of trying to translate your environment. So these poor souls roll into a human body and we're all about sensory and they're freaking out. They're like, oh my God, too many I don't need all this sensation. Plus I'm picking up all of the spiritual and psychic and electromagnetic properties off of everything. So a lot of the folks that I encounter who are labeled as on the spectrum, a lot of these folks and I have tremendous abilities to connect. And in that connection, I just dial way up on the frequency bandwidth when I'm chatting with them. And we have an opportunity to talk in a way that's very non-physical. Even if we're talking out of our mouths, it's a very non-physical type of communication. And I'm only aware of that. It's not like I'm some super genius. I'm only aware of that because I deal with so many off-worlders. I translate for so many off-world cultures that just like if you learn German and you hear someone speaking English with a German accent, your ear is going to pick that up and you're going to say, oh, aren't you from Germany? Wow. So when I'm energetically dealing with human beings whose vibration is very specific to someplace out in the Pleiades or someplace out by Otur or Sirius or any of these number of off-world realms, or Ka, who I haven't even talked about with you guys, hardly, probably not ever, I will. It's another realm that heavily influenced our Asian cultures about 100,000 years ago. So we've got this whole grouping of individuals that surf into the monkey suit, and that also counts for past lives. So when I get the awesome opportunity to read for people in a past life capacity, and I love doing past lives, it is so fun. I love it. A lot of times, if I'm being shown by these angelic beings that these people go back and back and back and back and back, what I'm finding is a lot of folks didn't start out on Earth. So when I talk about a younger soul, okay, it's important to note that generally that person may only have human lifetimes, or they may have ramped up as some sort of a mammal or sentient being into being a human being. And there are a lot of people who believe that you only are a sentient being over and over again, that you don't actually turn into something like a beetle and then you go to a worm and then you go to a mouse and then you go to a cat. A lot of people don't believe that that's the way that reincarnation works. And the Hindus absolutely believe that that's the way it works. And considering that Hinduism is it is the oldest documented religion in the world is Hinduism. That's consistently documented. We'll find some remnants of old religious modalities in a cave in the Middle East or something. Yet the still practiced oldest religious modality, or spiritual modality, I should say, on the planet is Hinduism. And that modality definitely believes that we go up the food chain through a little bitty ant all the way up to a person, and then we can keep being people until we achieve enlightenment, or maybe we're just a colossal wingdinger and we messed it up so bad we go back to being an ant. So there's different ways of looking at the spiritual evolutionary chain. I've never actually done a reading for anybody where I've looked at them and said, oh, wow, your last life was an armadillo. How was that? Did you like trying to rush the cars in Amarillo, Texas and not get smashed on the highway? I mean, how was that for you? I've never encountered that. Everybody I've ever read for either had previous human lives, previous off-world lives, previous elemental lives. I mean, just generally there is another more human-esque, genus-esque type of lifetime that people bring forward, which is super interesting as far as I'm concerned. Everybody I've gotten a chance to speak with is super fascinated about their past lives. Because let's face it, we want to know who we were, and human beings have an intrinsic, innate curiosity about who we are. We do. We just do. And the reason that we do is because we know we've been somebody else. That's a no-brainer for us. In fact, it's such a no-brainer that we deeply want to connect with histories that, let's be honest, guys, a lot of times we want to connect with histories that are more spectacular than our current life sometimes. So when we talk about past lives, very rarely have I ever had a client come to me and say, Danielle, can you tell me the biggest rotten jerk I've ever been? I want to know, have I really been the biggest douche to ever live? I need to know because I want to connect with that part of myself. That's generally not the question I get, okay? Usually it's like, I'm really curious about my past lives, and I would like to know if I ever did anything important, or if I was anybody who ever influenced people. And it's normal for we as creatures of light to want to know what we've done that left a mark that was positive. Now, a lot of times when I'm doing past life readings for folks, people are coming to me wanting to solve current problems in their life that they cannot put their finger on according to what would have caused that emotional, physical, or sometimes even spiritual problem in this lifetime that they're having. And I particularly love those readings for people because, man, seriously, gang, these angels come forward with so much information that is just incredible about what ails us. And what you may not know about past lives is that just in the same way that physical DNA will store trauma And physical DNA in our bodies will store generational trauma. There's been loads of studies done about children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren of survivors of the Nazi concentration camps and how those descendants of the folks who survived those heinous, awful conditions actually have triggered PTSD symptoms, even though their life would not reflect any realm of the same type of horror that that former relative would have once had. Our DNA augments itself to be prepared for an oncoming threat. Okay, so I want you to think about this just a minute. We're gonna go down a little mini rabbit hole, but this is so super cool. So our DNA augments itself so that it prepares the next generation to be on guard for any oncoming threats. It's not like our body is trying to store trauma to punish all these generations to come. It's that literally the body is attempting to understand what traumas are out there. So our genetic code is building a stronger scaffolding to be able to deal with that trauma should we ever encounter it again. It's humanity's way of being the Borg. You know, we cannot be destroyed. We just assimilate. And the Borg, if you ever watched Star Trek, you know, they flew around in a big cube and they were really scary and they were a hive mind. Yet if you shot one Borg, it would fall down. Then you'd shoot the next Borg, it would fall down. By the time you shot the third Borg with your phaser, don't you know, because you're on the Star Trek crew, and hopefully you're not wearing a red jersey or you're done before that episode even starts, but hopefully you're in a gold jersey or a blue jersey. Anyway. If you shoot the third Borg, then the third Borg has attenuated its shielding to understand what your phaser blast is so the Borg doesn't die. So in a weirdo way, our DNA is doing a very similar thing. If we are past tremendous traumas, our DNA is becoming Borg-like and it's evolving to be able to evolve past those traumas. The downside of that is that we may inherit some inherent hypervigilant tendencies. We may be super paranoid and we don't know why. We may be completely afraid of the dark and we don't know why. We may be obsessed with being able to get enough food and we have no clue why. But we have this completely hypervigilant, almost meerkat-like response to dealing in that realm, and that becomes its own challenge at that point. So the reason I went into physical DNA and what we pass on physically to our bodies, I wanted to give you the template for spiritual DNA. And there very much is a spiritual DNA. You know, obviously, when we're looking under a microscope and we look at the nucleus of a cell and we see the DNA that is protected within that nucleus sac, and as we discuss all the time on this show, DNA within the cell structure is literally a wormhole to God. It's a wormhole to a higher knowledge and to an incredible library of information that never runs out. And that vibration in that DNA can never touch the slower third dimension of the flesh or it dies. And I know I say that a lot on these shows, and you're going to hear me repeat that till I'm blue in the face, until it's ingrained in your very being that we have little pinpoint wormholes to creation, to the mysteries of the world, to being a miracle machine. We have pinpoint wormholes to heaven inside of every single one of our cells. True story. So just as that DNA exists for the flesh, we also have DNA that travels within the spirit. So when I have an opportunity to look at a human being, I get an opportunity to vibrationally not only check on the physical DNA and what's going on there, yet I have an opportunity to survey the spiritual DNA. And that DNA tips me off about how many lifetimes we've had in different realms that weren't human. Because just in the same way that we would pass on, okay, follow this, the same way that we would pass on genetic traits from one being to another that's human, telling the generations down the line how to survive traumas, spiritual DNA, as we go from being a person from Otur and a person from Sirius and a person from the Pleiades and a person from Ka and a human being over and over again. Each one of these spiritual makeups, if you will, leave a different spiritual imprint, or they leave a different, if you want to call it a chromosomal match set in your spiritual DNA. So somebody wired like me picks up all that stuff and is like, hey, this is cool. You had a life on Sirius, or here is this life that you had in Atlantis or whatnot. So this is what's so cool about past lives is they go way beyond just being human, way beyond. And my favorite past life work, as I was mentioning, is working with people who are trying to work out some kinks in their get-along that they're really not quite sure why they have these kinks. And that's kind of a big deal because when we look at why we're afraid of churches, and we have no idea why, there's usually a reason in our spiritual DNA that was passed on lifetime after lifetime, that just as trauma is passed through the physical body, that spirit is passing this down to the next incarnation going, you may want to watch out for the dictatorial whomevers, Christians, Muslims, name it, you name it, whoever it is that came in and overran your country, Greeks, it doesn't matter, in the name of their God, whatever people need to get them going in the morning. Yet your spirit's going to remember this stuff. So when we talk about past lives, it's really important to remember that we have been these other beings for 1,000,010 different reasons, one of which is for our own learning and also to affect our environment, to affect the way that the world works, to affect recycling energies in different planes of existence. I mean, there's a lot that goes into, why we're alive. Yet when we look at our own specific process, gang, okay? Past lives, how important are they to our current life? They're really important. Yet at the same time, they hold no importance because you are you in this lifetime. You are you. You are the accumulation of all these people that are beings that you've been. So does it matter? They absolutely matter. Yes, they do, because a lot of traumas are incurred in those past lives. And we go into another lifetime trying to work out the trauma from that past lifetime, because it would come up as perhaps a fail on our lesson set. Not that we fail. That's not how the universe looks at it. But for the sake of being very polarized in the sake of time, maybe we got a C on that aspect of the whole spiritual report card. So we're going back in as a different being to become somebody else, to be able to do something different, to be able to elevate the situation. Are you following here? So yes, they're important to who we've been. They are pivotal in who we are. Yet at the same time, the only thing that matters in this life is who you are right now. So when I talk to clients about past lives, I'm very specific to make sure that even though the lineage of the spirit is coming forward, that we don't get lost in perhaps a more romantic life where we were royalty, or we had more money, or we had the mate we always wanted. It's very important that just because we were somebody fabulous, it's very important that we don't live on that lifetime. And I know. I can feel it. There's a lot of you out there going, oh, I know that. I know, of course I know that. Yet I also know, gang, I know a tremendous amount of unbelievably well-intentioned, deeply spiritual, deeply knowledgeable people who in this lifetime starts to get a little bumpy, rocky, weird, get a little bit lost in the last time that they were, Napoleon's right-hand man, or the last time they ruled a country, or the last time they were the special priest or priestess in a nation. And then that person becomes too attached to the glory days of that lifetime. And we then negate the fact that we are here in this lifetime to be who we are, to live our lives now, and to be able to fold in all of these lessons, and especially to receive healing if we came into this lifetime to receive healing from a past life. So let me give you an example. I've read for many hundreds, actually now thousands of people, And a common theme, and I'm not going to recount any one person's past life because that's private, and I don't, unless I have permission with a client to talk about their story. I don't believe in airing people's personal readings. That's insane. Yet I'll give you an example. I run across many people who have had religious persecution in their lifetimes, or who were burned, or who were stoned, or who were locked up, or just ostracized by family because of the use of their spiritual gifts. So they come in this lifetime and they're born into, say, a very heavily Christian family, and they are incredibly psychically gifted. So they are set again with the challenge, yet in a more hospitable lifetime where you're not going to get burned or drowned or impaled or locked in a dungeon because you're a seer. So people will still experience a paralytic fear of bringing their gifts and talents forward in this lifetime if they have been persecuted because of those talents in the past. Because why? Because our spiritual DNA stores it, just like the physical DNA stores it and passes trauma from generation to generation. We pass the trauma to ourselves so that we may overcome the trauma, so that we may learn that there is nothing but love and nothing but higher vibration and light that conquers in this realm of existence, not in the third dimension. Love wins every flippin' time. Light wins every flippin' time. And I watch folks experimenting with lessons of the separation from source. That's what angels call it when we human beings go into these weirdo places of being detached and pretending that it's all gone to heck and we're never going to have enough money. And the angels call that the illusion of the separation from source, or from the one that is all, or from the all. Because it's an illusion. We can't separate ourselves from cosmic consciousness. We are cosmic consciousness. So the fact that we're sitting here going, I'm going to go ahead and only dive into my past lives and I'm not going to be in this life. That's not going to work. We can say, I'm only going to be in this lifetime and nothing I've done in the past is going to make a difference. That's not going to work either. Our past lives and our present lives are all about balancing the fullness of who we are so that as we go forward in the world, we can expand ourselves and we can become incredible and help ourselves heal as well as healing other people. Seriously. Now, a question I receive a lot from people is, have you read for a lot of people who are very famous people? Actually, I'd say that's been about a handful of people. And if you think about it, there are really only a handful of famous people on the planet. So even over the decades and the eons, we have a few standouts. And I've read for a couple of people who were actually royalty that we'd read about in the history books, and that's very rare. And the irony was when I told those people that they were figures who were actually in history books, they denied it. They said, no, that I could not possibly be that queen. You're kidding. But it's true. And the grand irony is in this lifetime, an individual that I read for who was royalty in another time period is an extremely down-to-earth person who does not believe in entitlement nor hierarchy and believes that we should all be treated the same way. The irony is if you look up that particular nobility in the past, that noble figure also believed the very same thing and resented the station that they were in because they could not be more part of the people. So this individual came back as a regular everyday human being and lives a regular everyday human being life, yet does a significant amount of influencing of people because that is who they are. They are built to be a light. So we do see these fascinating turnarounds of people who were very important, famous people and who step forward as just regular everyday Janes and Joes in this lifetime, yet they are huge influencers in their own way. It takes a very specific type of soul, gang, to be a leader. Leadership is not something that you just fall into. Most people can't handle it. Most people say, I'd love to be the president or I'd love to be the head of a company. And it's a flippant comment because if you were the president of the United States, you would constantly be loved and you would constantly be hated. at varying intervals all the time. And no matter what happens, say if you're president of the US, no matter what happens with Congress, you're going to get blamed. No matter what happens with the Supreme Court, you're going to get blamed. No matter what happens with local governments, you're going to get blamed because you're the front person. So people who go into roles of leadership are either completely designed that way spiritually. They are there to uplift and hold a space. They have a lot of spiritual DNA practice in holding the space for something magnificent. Even if it wasn't a big famous country, it could have been a movement they started. It could have been a country that no longer exists, but that individual shepherded or held together the space for a persecuted group of people. I mean, the leadership stamp in DNA is incredible. And it's not always doled out to old souls. Sometimes we get younger souls. Sometimes the leader of human beings is someone who's only had human lifetimes for the last 300,000 years. That's actually a younger soul, gang. I can't stress it enough. We don't have first timers in a human body here on Earth. We just don't. Now, I know you may be thinking that you know a few of those people who you are just absolutely positive are here for the first time. But I am telling you, it's just not possible. Our environment is too chaotic. There's too much to navigate here for a first timer. This would not be the place a first timer would go. They would go out by the Pleiades. They would be nurtured into this 1,000-year life cycle. Believe me when I tell you that whatever your idea of God is, or higher consciousness, or higher awareness, that being actually has zero desire to make our life hell. That is not true. That being is all, that consciousness is all love. It is 100% support. It is 100% joy and miracles for you. And quite frankly, we could be living in heaven every single day of our lives down here on earth. We allow the mind to wander into caverns of despair. We allow the mind to wander into places where there's the illusion of the separation from this connected, amazing love planet that we're part of. That's us. That's not a consciousness or God or the collective being punishing us. That's us, quite honestly, being a little self-indulgent and getting caught up in our own stuff. And we all do it. We're human. Let's just hold that grace for ourselves and one another and move along, all right? So when we're talking about humans that are lifted up or ascend to the point of leadership, we're not always dealing with the oldest of the old souls. Sometimes we're dealing with some young souls. And by young, gang, I'm talking about you're usually at least 100,000 or 200,000 years old in a person suit. Yet when you look at the average age of a soul on Earth, I mean, you're talking at least 1 million years old. The souls that hit Earth are old. And on average, because some of them are super, super, super old, and some of them are 200,000 years old and whatnot. So I'm going to give you an example of temperaments and leadership styles that reflect lengths of time being in either leadership positions or just lifetime positions. Most leaders who do have the spiritual DNA to be leaders have also been people who have been deeply tread upon, okay? Most really great leaders have been people who have been subjugated and treated really poorly. So when they bring that experience into their spiritual DNA in this lifetime, they understand what it is to have compassion. Those are our great leaders. Then we have leaders that are just really, really excited to be sitting in the big chair with their big fancy binder and their fancy pen with their name on it and the pin of their country on their vest. And they're just having so much fun with the swag. And that's generally your younger souls. Yet there can be younger soul leaders or middle-aged soul leaders that are fantastic because they're so enthusiastic about the process of being a leader. So the world is full of many, 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 many leaders, many. And we here in the Western world, in the United States, we hear about a top few if they're making news because of commerce or we're in some big weird trade fight with them, or there was some devastating thing happened at their country, and we're hearing about what's going on with the people. When we have that opportunity to hear about world leaders, I mean, sadly, that's generally the American public's take on world leadership. I mean, if you were to ask the average American, who's the leader of Denmark? I don't even think I could answer that question. And I think Denmark rocks, okay? And I'm not exactly the dullest bulb. So let's just start with some of our more Westernly recognized leaders. Just because if I throw some of these folks out, I think many people might not know quite who I'm speaking about to have a reference for the life of the new or old life. But let's look at Macron in France. You know, you look at that guy and he's been so great with diplomacy lately and just leading the world in an altruistic upswing right now. And he's actually a middle-aged soul. Macron is all about, his whole thing is about, well, I've done some time in some particular arenas where I have been a very bad leader. And in the past, and I get some really great, we like to call them barbarian lifetimes or just really rough tribal lifetimes up in the outskirts of ancient Germany up there. And he was a brutal leader and a rough leader. And during those lifetimes, you know, it was bash in the head and don't ask questions. So Macron himself has had a tremendous amount of experience in black and white and polarized leadership. So for him to come in this bridge building capacity is really amazing for France, because he's also being a bridge builder for the world. Now, this is also a gentleman who in a different lifetime has been a female, and that female has been part of an indigenous culture in the African continent. And that female was very key to birthing babies and to healthy living and to being a healer. So Macron has come in with some really interesting skill sets as a middle-aged soul, basically, to come in here and say, hey, guess what? Let's really use what we've got to build going forward, which is, in my opinion, that's pretty fabulous. You know, you take another fantastic middle-aged soul is Angela Merkel over there in Germany. You know, she's trying to balance everything and get her done. And, you know, there's a lot of critics of her that she's too hardcore and this and that and whatever, you know, yet honestly, she's coming from a place of trying to achieve balance. And the last leadership position I see for her was in that old Minoan Etruscan pre-Greek, she was a man, type of civilization. And we're talking trade and running fleets of ships. So it's kind of funny to me that, you know, she's in more of a landlocked country at this time. However, there is that need to try to understand others and try to be the voice of the many. And I know that when you read the news, you hear a lot of the European Union get upset with her, saying, look, we want to get out of the European Union because it's just Angela Merkel's voice. Well, if you look back at this past life she had when she was this male who was a major leader of, I'm going to call it almost a Minoan society, yet they were heavy traders with other cultures, it was very important for her to be able to speak for lots and lots and lots of different little islands and outlying areas, and kind of what she said went as this dude back in the day. I mean, think of a Poseidon-looking guy. That was Angela Merkel, man, just raw, you know. And so then I also get a chance to see that she was a woman who was up in what we would now think of northern Russia, and was in a migratory tribe that we like to call gypsies. Yet she was somebody who dealt with, as a seer, a divinator. You know, this is somebody who dealt with looking into tea leaves and whatever their divination was. Actually, they were reading some kind of guts here, which quite honestly, as I look at this, is the grossest thing ever. But Angela Merkel was a gut reader back in the day, and how the guts spilled out on the ground it was a bird, and you'd catch this bird alive and spill its guts out, and like a dove. And as it wasn't a dove, it looked like a pigeon or something, but it's like a pigeon or a raven or something. Anyway, I'm getting into minutia. These guts would spill out and she'd read them. So it's going to make sense that she may come into this lifetime wanting to bring a lot of order, and whatever she says goes. And she's very comfortable heading up something like a European Union because she did that for the island chains. And also she relied heavily on her intuition in the past. Now this lifetime, I see her fighting with her intuition like crazy. And this is her trying to remain more in a logical space. So that's got to probably be a hiccup in her get along. But Angela Merkel is a middle-aged soul. That's a middle-aged soul. You know, you look at Theresa May over there in the UK. And Theresa May, she's a bit of an older soul, and she's mostly been a man. And her old soul tendencies, I see just a religious hierarchy, actually. And the type of leadership that when I look at Theresa May, the type of leadership that she had back in the day, that's like the right-hand man of the Pope back in the Vatican. And we're talking the heyday, the 1400s of Italy. And I never see her as being the Pope, yet she's that person who's, I can't even remember what that's called. There's a name for it. Like if the Pope dies, you become the Pope, or the Pope de facto or something like that. Yet she was that individual. And so she was very orthodox. She was very, very, very conservative in that lifetime and had to deal with a lot going on, especially with a lot of internal political struggle and, the scandals. And ironically, she's dealing with all of these different cabinet members of hers, and actually parliament members, who are resigning due to sex scandals and whatnot. Well, part of that is how she counseled the Pope back in that 1400s period. Part of her learning in this lifetime, she was counseling that Pope to just, kind of just, you got to protect the establishment, just kind of shove it under the carpet. And that was her then his outlook on a lot of what they were looking at that time. So Theresa May in this lifetime looks like she's working out a few little hinks with dealing with her own administration and or her own cabinet members who are dealing with having to be very transparent about their indiscretions, as opposed to the old days where she really did counsel those things to be covered up. Yet if you look at the vibration that Theresa May has, there's almost a liturgy to the way that she does stuff. And again, that poor woman is, she's going through a lot over there with Brexit and everything else. However, that's again part of her past life, lesson that she's dealing with there. So then we go and let's pick on some of our younger souls. Bashar al-Assad in Syria, young soul. That's a soul that's still pulling the legs off of the grasshopper to see them twitch on the ground because they're fascinated by how that works. I mean, that's a soul that's just amazed at the mechanics of humanity and what happens when you drop gas on people and what happens when you this and when you that. That actually is a young soul. And this person is here to learn. And I look at this individual has been a leader in many smaller tribal environments around the world. And I'm getting indigenous tribal environments and just, very violent tribal environments. So this is actually for al-Assad, this is one of the more refined lifetimes of this individual. And because Assad is dealing with such major world powers that we'll get to in just a second, it's not unusual that you see a very, very young soul like Assad dealing with very, very old souls. Are you ready for this? Like Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Now, before you fall off your chair thinking, how could Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump be a very, very, very old soul? Let me tell you how. I cannot stress enough that when we come down here to learn as a young soul, if we are receiving too much negative information about how we're acting from other people, if we're hearing too many negatives, then a younger soul eventually will make changes because they're young. I mean, think about a child, okay? A child acts like a nightmare, and then they're punished, and they are set with the accountability for what they've done, and that child pulls it together. They don't want to get in trouble like that again. They pull it together. They learn. They become a bigger, better, faster, stronger person than who they were before they misstepped, okay? An old soul, especially a really old soul, is not going to do that. The really old soul is going to hang in there and just keep the horrible program running no matter what. They're going to be, think of like a spaceship going through a wormhole, and they're just going to hold their trajectory, and the whole spaceship is just shaking apart, and they're the astronaut in that spaceship, and the wing is flying off, and the hull is flying off, and the protective plates are flying off, and the cabin is depressurizing, and the oxygen is flying out, and this wormhole is just crushing this particular craft. Yet that astronaut, by God, they're going to go down with this ship because they're going to hold it dead on course, even if it kills them. That takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of call to duty. It takes a lot of commitment to the plan. And it takes, in a weird way, if you step back off it a minute, it takes a degree of selflessness to be that person that everybody hates so much. Because you got to remember, gang, as human beings, we are empathic beings. We are Bluetoothed together. So when we hate somebody as much as certain people hate Trump or certain people hate Vladimir Putin all over the world, you are feeling that hatred. It is impossible, humans, hear this. It is impossible for us not to feel one another and not to feel vibes that are cast in our direction. That is absolutely impossible. Impossible. So to be that old soul like Vladimir Putin, who pretty much a majority of the world thinks is a rotten scoundrel and doesn't like, and then to be someone like Donald Trump, who outside of a pocket of people in the United States is looked at like a crazy person overall. If you don't understand the American bravado culture, you'll look at Donald Trump and be like, wow, that guy is way off the rails. We don't even get that. Why is he getting so much applause? That's such an Americanized, grandiose bravado that you've got to be a really old soul to pull that one off from beginning to middle and end. And you look back on Donald's life, and he's pretty much been this guy for a super long time. So when you have these super old souls like Vladimir Putin and Trump, and they interact with an Assad who's a very, very young soul, what you've got is the young soul learning a lot really quickly. They're being outflanked. They're being outmoded. They're being outplanned. They're being outbombed. They're being out everything. And that soul then grows. And generally, when you see somebody like an Assad, their next lifetime is generally going to be pretty benevolent and dedicated towards service. And of course, you know, we here in the United States, we always get the worst of the worst Americanized press stories where we're always the hero and everybody else sucks. That's news in America. Thank God most of us know that over here. So we go to BBC and we listen to what's actually happening in the rest of the world. However, when you look at, say, Donald Trump, who is a very old soul, he has actually been an extremely good Caesar, back in Rome. You know, he has been good people in his lifetime. This is actually a very intuitive woman leader down in South America. I mean, and he's also been very poor. He's been dirt poor other times. So this human being, it has really been crafted for this specific role in our play right now that takes 2 or 3 really big characters to enact very polarizing behavior to turn the energies in this feminine time frame so that people step up and enact their miracle potential. I mean, that's a real gift to be able to hold that space shuttle as it's falling apart and it's crushing it around you. And you can feel all that pressure, but man, you just keep out that plan. You just never grow. You never come out of it. You never say you're sorry. You just run that thing right into the wall. By God. And you take Vladimir Putin, who is a very old soul also. And Vlad Putin has been some mean people. That individual has been mean. That is somebody that I can actually say has been Vlad twice. Vladimir Putin has also been Vladimir the Impaler, who we like to call Dracula. I mean, he's been a really super famous bad guy, which is really exciting, right? It's like, wow, you were Dracula. Get out of here. Yet it's true. So he's been a Vlad twice. He's also been a shepherd. He has also been a leader in what was then Sumeria as a male priest, and he was a good leader in that lifetime. So we've got some heavy hitters coming around, and this would explain why Putin is probably the leading old soul right now in terms of how he is playing the hand of every other past life he's ever had. I mean, seriously, that guy is just crazy like a fox. That's a brilliant human being. Now, I'm not saying I'm necessarily a fan of Vladimir Putin. I think he's ruthless and he's scary. Yet, when we're talking strict spiritual DNA here, gang, okay? When I look at that, this guy is remembering every page out of every playbook he's ever had. As a conqueror, as a world leader, as somebody who knows how to go back behind somebody's back and, completely manipulate and control. I mean, whoa. This guy's, he's pulling on all his lifetimes, although I'm sure he's very happy to be Vladimir Putin right now. Yet he too is an old soul. He's an old soul. So when we look at the types of old souls we have on the earth that are interacting, look at the lessons that Putin is bringing to the world. The same thing that we experienced over here in America, having our election information messed with, and actually we had our districts gerrymandering messed with electronically. We had where ballots were counted and where ballots were to go out and be mailed messed with. And this was all the Russian interference. I mean, that also happened in England. It happened with Brexit. I mean, Putin's just sitting over there going, yep, I'm just throwing every card down I got from every long-standing lifetime understanding human nature, and here it is. So he is providing, as a very old soul, a tremendous amount of opportunity for us as a planet to see how under illusion we can be when looking at our world leadership or our news. I mean, if we really look at it, he's playing the character of the great exposer for how weak so many systems are and how weak we can be as many world cultures wanting the one savior that will save us instead of really being proactive as a nation. So even though Putin's big plan is to, disrupt democracy, and that's just what he does, the irony is it strengthens democracy because everybody sees it coming and saying, well, wait a minute, I'm going to get up and run for my local school district board now. And so, there's the funniest balance between old soul and young soul interaction and what may seem like totalitarian, ruthless, horrible stuff. And I'm not saying it's not, okay? I'm just saying that when you take a step back off of it and you look how all these players play into this, it gets really super fascinating. I mean, you look at, a middle-aged soul, another one, Malcolm Turnbull in Australia. They just recently passed same-sex marriage down there. And he's another middle-aged soul that's just like, hey, let's just all get in and let's have some great times together. Justin Trudeau, who I love up in Canada, super old soul. And he had a majority of his lifetimes in a Hindu culture. He was coming in from this complete guru perspective, so it doesn't surprise me at all that he's the guy he is now. But he's a really old soul in a young body, which I think is interesting. Malcolm Turnbull, this is not his first lifetime in Australia. He came over and had penal colony lifetimes where he was a crook shipped out of England. So he understands what it is to be completely stepped on. And he's had a particular burr in his saddle to be somebody who could make a big difference. So I think it's fascinating that now here he is, a leader in Australia. Shizo Abe, who is the Japanese leader, he is a young soul, but man, he is full of optimism. He's loving life. He's one of those excited young souls as opposed to Assad, who is more of, al-Assad is more of a destructive young soul. Shizo Abe is just, he's like, all about building and community, and he's excited to be a human being, and he's excited to be here. And I get an opportunity to see that he's been a female many times, and that's been in that Tibetan culture. And this is people who dealt with what we would call a nurse or someone who looked after their cultures and the animals. I mean, there's a lot of caregiver vibe there. Now we've got, of course, China. Holy cow, we've got a big old soul, Jinping over there. Honestly, that gentleman is just, that's some heavyweight. He's a heavyweight person. And really, he's here, the energies that he brings forward in terms of the big world power old souls. He's an old soul. He goes way back. And he brings in this balance that's going to remain temperate, just kind of between the let's play every card I can with every lifetime I've ever manipulated anybody with to change world dynamics, Vladimir Putin, and the, hey, guess what? I'm your bumbling uncle and I'm just going to keep tripping over my shoelaces and making a TV show out of it, Donald Trump. He's playing the moderate role there. And when I look back on his lifetimes, I mean, that's serious Viking lives. Those are serious lives where those are westernized lives where he was planning invasions. He wasn't a king, yet he was somebody who planned with the king. I mean, this is somebody who spent a lot of time either leading in a tribal atmosphere, we're talking about the leader of China, or they have advised other people. When I look at Donald Trump, I didn't really talk about who he's been. I mean, a little bit here and there. Yet some of his most effective lives were in the early 19th century as big business people coming over from England. And then you go back, and a lot of this is business. It's not just business, it's leadership driven and it's development driven. So he's got a lot of lifetimes that weigh in where he was doing some pretty amazing things. And then it really makes sense to me why he's a business mogul who's now been elected president, because he brings in a very specific small focus to the larger global focus. And we have to have that too, to be able to get through this feminine time frame. So if you can see how all these players really, lay down the mat here for world evolution, this is important stuff. And let's not forget old Kim Jong-un over there, who, believe it or not, is a fairly young soul. He's just getting into middle age. Yet he's young enough and middle age enough, just coming into that middle age to understand that, it's all fine and dandy to parade around in your own country, but when you come up against some big, heavy old soul hitters, and China is one of them, that it's best to just kind of dial it back a little bit and make a few changes and later go back to your original rant. And so that's what his whole dynamic is. And his whole dynamic has been about bragging until he's come up against really, really wild card old souls like, say, Donald Trump. And so even critics of Donald Trump have observed the wild cardness of Donald Trump and how suddenly Kim Jong-un is kind of changing his tune. And by the way, he's going to go back to his nuclear program and he's going to do whatever he's going to do. Yet he's trying to build alliances because he sees the fall of America as fairly imminent. So it's easier for him as a younger or middle soul to build alliances and learn from others. And he's now, South Korea and North Korea are now talking again, which is good. So that's an old enough soul just out of barely the young into the middle age to begin to understand that, well, okay, you got to give a little to take a little here. The real young souls just go for it in whatever they're doing. They're like, we got this. Wah! Kim Jong-un is at least standing in a space of, okay, I'm going to play a card or two and take a step back and go get a haircut. And when these crazy people aren't here anymore, I'm going to step right back up to my last agenda because that's how I roll. So we get a chance to see how all of these world leaders, and this is just a handful, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of world leaders out there, yet these are most of our newsmakers that we hear about all the time. And it really gives you an opportunity to see how this balance works. And so when we talk about past lives, it is important to remember that, yes, who we were, who we are, is who we were, yet who we are in this lifetime is who we are. And that is the hardest part of all when talking about past lives. So keep that in mind when you're researching your own. It is amazing to find out who we've been. Definitely seek assistance. If you think that there's something in this lifetime that you just can't explain. I had a client who they said it was okay for me to talk about this story, who had an extreme fear of snakes. Like, it was crazy. They couldn't figure out why. Turned out they'd been killed by them in the Fertile Crescent area. And if you've got a weird fear of the dark that you can't get your hand on, and you've gone to a hypnotherapist and nothing happened to you in this lifetime, really spend some time with who you've been. Yet understand that who you are now is the gift that is here for the world. The gift that is here for the world. And I want to make sure to pass this on, that everything that you bring to the table in this lifetime, yes, has been a spiritual and genetic combination of not only your own spiritual genetics that your soul brings in, but also the physical genetics that your ancestors are bringing in. So those physical genetics remember lifetimes. They do. Our physical genetics will remember, have actual physical memories of other lifetimes. So not only are we experiencing our own lifetimes, we're experiencing the collective consciousness or gene memories, Gene, the gene memories of our ancestors. Think about this. This is amazing. I mean, it's amazing. So make sure that you bring your sentience and your awareness into the present. It's important to be who you are. You may have been Cleopatra, but you're Jane Jones now, or you're Bob Jones now. And what's important is, how do you use all of Cleopatra's knowledge? Think of yourself as a mainframe computer that can access tons of different life experiences to solve one problem. And really, that's where we should put the strength of our past lives. They are learning lessons for us. They are not necessarily there to be celebrated, although I've had some really good ones that I love referencing once in a while, yet I'm surely not living on them. I live here. I live in the 21st century. I live in Montana. I don't live in Greece anymore. Although, dang, I want to go back to Greece and just party it up a little bit. Come on! A little old home week for just 5 seconds. Yet I recognize that I'm not that person anymore. So take your knowledge of your past lives, your curiosities, take those, use them to heal past life wounds, use situations in your present life that could heal a past wound, address those situations. If you're somebody who hates going into churches because you were religiously oppressed, work it up to go into a church. Show yourself you're not going to die. Put that particular fear to rest. Because as we do that and as we move forward, we become the most strong, incredible, effective bringer of light, love, and change that we were intended to be in this lifetime, in this incarnation. And that's why you're wearing the monkey suit right now, is to be the best you can be and be present. So know that. Man, I can't even believe we're out of time. I'm getting flagged down by my engineer over here. We are out of time, yet I didn't even get to some paranormal fun facts. That's okay. There were just a few mentions. I'll save them from the next show. That's not a big deal. In our next show, we're going to be talking about the spookier part of off-worlders. Who are the creepy off-worlders? What are the Greys doing? What are the reptilians? Are there really beings out there that would take us over and eat us? And what about monsters? Do we really have monsters that walk the planet? So next show, we're going to be talking about the creepy off-worlders. Do they pose us a threat? Are they even relevant to our nation at this time as a human race? And we're going to be talking about monsters. Where do we find the real monsters? Plus, I'll throw in a few paranormal fun facts, and we're going to look at some crazy world news that's coming up this week. I don't want to give you any spoilers, but we'll reevaluate it next week. So everybody, go forward, have a tremendous week, and enact 100% of who you are in this lifetime, because you are a wealth of healing, leadership, and love. Go for it. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.